Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Kevin Olson. I'm a recovered alcoholic.
Kevin.
Welcome, ladies and gentle drunks, to the fourth dimension. Big book study, that is. Very great to have you here. I know I'm certainly glad I'm here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And I suspect we'll have a few more people come in and jump on. But let's get started anyway. We will begin, as we always do, with the set-aside prayer. God, please help me to set aside everything I think I know about you, about me, about my fellow man, about the 12 steps. And please allow me to gain a fresh new vision, perspective, and understanding of what you, what me, what my fellow man, and the 12 steps are all about. Amen. And my trusty sponsee and reader, Brad, is here tonight. Wonderful to have you, Brad. Would you be kind enough, Brad, to read for us maybe the two parts in the book that describe the fourth dimension, as this is the fourth dimension big book study? So for the sake of tradition, we'll have you read page 8 and then page 25 for us.
On page 8, it says, I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. And on page 25, halfway down the page, it says, we have found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed.
All right, rock and roll. Thank you, Brad. Appreciate it, man. And great to have you here, as always. And for the sake of tradition, guys, we're going to be rocketed into the fourth dimension. We're going to be catapulted into the fourth dimension. And everyone who would, everybody, please put one hand up like this. Everybody put another hand up like this. Don't get ahead of me, Cash. Don't get ahead. And everybody go, oh yeah. For anybody who's listening on the recording on YouTube, it's just audio. We were just raising the roof of our consciousness, elevating our recovery into the fourth dimension, brothers and sisters. Man, I absolutely insist on enjoying life. I absolutely insist, and I hope you will too. And I'm going to have a good time here tonight, man. It's totally optional, but I highly recommend it. I'm a fundamental member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I believe if I don't have fun, I'm going to go damn mental. Fun, damn mental. Love you lots, guys. I'm glad you're all here. Let's get into it. So last week, we read all about Bill. We learned about Bill Wilson. We learned about the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. We learned that Bill Wilson was the first person in the history of the world to have three pieces of information that an alcoholic like me needs to know in order to attain recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous. You can see them behind me right now. I hope you can, and if you can't, I'll open a file right now, and you guys will be able to see it on the screen. I need to know what the problem is. I needed to know what the solution to that problem is. And I needed a program of action that a guy like me can do to achieve that solution, to overcome that problem. And here, I'll share it for you guys in just a second. And again, we talked about the fact that Bill Wilson, the only thing really special or unique about Bill Wilson is that he is the first person in the history of the world to have access to all three pieces of this information at once. And so tonight, although functionally it's considered this chapter is still part of step 1, the chapter There Is a Solution is still considered part of step 1. This is really where we begin to, for the first time, get an understanding of what the solution is in Alcoholics Anonymous. The solution, of course, being what Dr. Carl Jung is going to talk about today, vital spiritual experience, okay? And in our book, it describes it as many different things, many different things that we can call this solution. But functionally, the solution in Alcoholics Anonymous is really that God conquers alcoholism. Okay, it's really that simple. That power that I believe in today is more powerful than alcoholism. That said, it's not as simple as me just flipping on a light switch and just getting God. Okay, if it was, we would have a 2-step program and no one would ever relapse. I would come to AA, I would admit I was powerless, I would just flick on the God switch, and I would just be along my merry way. And it's, of course, it's not that easy. It's not that easy. And why is it not that easy? And I want to introduce you guys to a concept tonight, really, for the first time. I don't know if I've talked about this yet. Sorry, guys, one of my sponsees is texting me for the coordinates to the Big Book study, so I just sent that to him. I want to talk about this concept of Wi-Fi. And some of you, for sure, any of my sponsees or anyone who's been to the study before will have, for sure, have heard me talk about this before. Raise your hand if you've heard me talk about the Wi-Fi analogy before, okay? Yeah, I mean, when my first sponsor started to talk to me about it, he would respond to it as, he talked about the radio, turning in the dial on a radio. And Clancy Immeslin, my grand sponsor, I've heard him talk about it as though it's like the rabbit ears on a television set, okay? Really, I just wanted to update it, okay? Modernize the analogy. And the analogy is this. Everybody here, I'm sure, has been in a situation where you're trying to log onto your computer, you're trying to log onto your phone, and you can't get into the Wi-Fi, okay? You got a bad connection, okay? You might be in a parkade, you might be in a forest, like out in the woods somewhere or something like that. You're trying to get online and you can't, okay? Because we have a bad connection, okay? Does that mean that the Wi-Fi doesn't exist? Does that mean that the Wi-Fi abandoned me? Does that mean that I'm angry at the Wi-Fi or I'm mad at the Wi-Fi or anything like that? No, of course not. What needs to change? The Wi-Fi doesn't need to change. There's nothing wrong with the Wi-Fi. What needs to change is my connection to the Wi-Fi. I need to change something about me and my orientation to that Wi-Fi. And that's really my understanding of the program of action in Alcoholics Anonymous. The purpose of the 12 steps is to help me clear away the things within me. Chuck Chamberlain talks about uncovering, discovering, and discarding the things within me that are blocking me from that power, okay? And so today, anyway, in any event, guys, we're going to talk about the chapter, There's a Solution. I love this chapter. And this chapter is really going to outline that there is a power and that there is a power that we can get connected to. And we're going to discuss a lot more about our problem. And one of the most important things in ever that I began to understand about my own alcoholism and drinking in general is in this book and is in this chapter rather. And we're going to talk about the distinction between the moderate drinker, the heavy drinker, and the real alcoholic. That was a key and pivotal piece in my understanding of my disease. What was the difference between me and those other guys that I could see that could go out and get drunk and have fun and party, but there was something different about me. And I knew it and I could tell it and I could feel it and I hated it. I hated that there was this different thing about me. I didn't know what it was. Why was it? It was inexplicable. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's go to page 17, chapter 2. There is a solution. One of the things that Joe and Charlie like to point out is the title of this chapter. There is a solution. Number one, that's a great promise for anyone who's here who is hopeless and feeling like your problems are insurmountable. Number one, there is a solution. But Joe and Charlie also like to point out there is only one solution in Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay? There is one singular solution. I know a lot of times we might hear in AA meetings, well, there's as many different solutions as there are people in AA. It's like, that's not what our book says. Our book is pretty clear. There is one solution. There is a solution, and that solution is getting connected to God. Okay? Other types of treatments may have other ideas on how it's done. Okay? But in Alcoholics Anonymous, we have a solution. We have one. And that solution is God. And it's a solution for most people who have found no other solution. Believe me, raise your hand if you tried other solutions prior to coming to AA. Okay, most of us have tried every solution under the sun, man. And for people who have found no other solution that worked, we know that we have an answer. We know that we have an answer. But, I heard the great speaker, Steve Lee, he talks about AA is like a great steak restaurant. Okay, we're like a great steak restaurant. You want steak, you come to our shop, man. We have got a great steak, but don't come here looking for sushi. And don't come here looking for tacos. We've got one thing and it works really, really well. If you are an alcoholic that needs to have a spiritual awakening, holy man, do we have the recipe? We've got it. Okay. But if you're looking for something else, don't come here to try and find it, because we don't have it. We have 12 suggestions. We've got 12 steps, and they are suggestions, but they're the only 12 suggestions we have. We don't have 12 other suggestions for you. Okay. When you come to AA, this is our solution, and there is a singular solution. And I think it's important to talk about that. Okay, so Brad, let's kick it off. We of Alcoholics Anonymous, page 17, guys, let's rock and roll.
Hey everybody, I'm Brad. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Brad.
Is a solution. We of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. We are average Americans. All sections of the country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix, but there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We are like the passengers of a great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us, but that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined.
All right, so a couple things there. Number one, it's funny to me because they say, we are people who normally would not mix. And at this time, there was like 100 people from the Eastern Seaboard, upper middle class people from the Eastern Seaboard of the United States. Almost all of them were from, Vermont, Connecticut, New York. And they were exactly people who typically kind of mixed a lot compared to today. Today, there are really genuinely people of every stripe, of every denomination, of every color under the sun, of every orientation. We represent, really everyone around the world. And we are truly people who normally would not mix. One of my favorite jokes about AA is that Alcoholics Anonymous is the only place where you can look in the front row and you'll see the bank robber, the bank teller, and the president of the bank all sitting in the front row. And that's always been a funny joke to me. So now let's talk about this analogy that they make about the great liner, moments after shipwreck, and so on and so forth. Raise your hand. Anybody here ever seen the movie Titanic? All right. Okay. Everyone else is lying. That says they haven't seen it, but that's okay. Anyway, everybody remember the character Jack, played by Leonardo DiCaprio? Okay, you remember the area of the ship that he was in? Remember where all the less fortunate, the poor people will say were? That's steerage, okay? And so they're talking about steerage in this great ocean liner like the Titanic. You guys remember Rose, okay? Very rich, well-to-do. Well, there's a special place on the boat where if you had a certain kind of money, if you had a certain kind of old money on a boat like that, and you had a certain kind of maybe political prestige, or you were renowned as a well-to-do person, you would sometimes be invited to eat at the captain's table, which is the finest of everything, the finest food, the finest wine, the finest service, everything. Okay. And what they're saying here, really, the analogy is really simple. When the Titanic struck that iceberg and that boat starts to sink, suddenly it doesn't matter what section of the boat you're in. It does not matter if you're in steerage or if you're at the captain's table. It does not matter. Everyone is equal at that point. And that's like alcoholism, man. Alcoholism and drug addiction is the great equalizer. I always say the only, the guy behind the dumpster at the mustard seed homeless shelter tonight, and the guy living in the penthouse in Eau Claire in Calgary, where I live. Things might look different on the outside, but you and I know they both feel the same on the inside, don't they? Right? Outward appearances are not inward reality. Okay? And so that's really the point that they're trying to make. But most importantly, guys, what I needed to understand about, and this chapter really changed my understanding of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it changed my understanding of our purpose in AA. As did learning about the history, learning about the Oxford group and learning about what they were about, and understanding that they were not a society, a fellowship of people who were trying to stop drinking. They were people who wanted to have a deeper experience of God. Okay? That is where we come from. And that changed my understanding of what Alcoholics Anonymous is all about. Because I kept trying to come here and focusing on the drinking, and focusing on the problem. And I'm the guy who would sit around and say, you know, in these rooms, we've all got the same problems. We're all in the same boat here in these problems, you know, and I would want to tell war stories, and I would talk about insanity at AA meetings and, you know, step one, and talk about all that stuff. And I would really focus on the drinking. And this next paragraph changes my understanding of what my focus should be in Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay? Changing it from focusing on drinking and the using to focusing on the solution. Brad, can you read that for us?
The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out in which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism.
Beautiful. I love that. Okay. And that paragraph, when I really began to understand it, when I really began to study this book, you know, with Joe and Charlie and the Cowboy Ray, the old Cowboy Ray Big Book Studies here in Calgary. And I studied this book meticulously for years. That paragraph changed my understanding of what I was doing in AA. Prior to that, I'd been in and out of AA for many, many years. In and out of AA, going to 5 meetings a day, 3 topic discussion meetings, talking about my problems, thinking that going to meetings and talking about my problems was solution to alcoholism, and it isn't. And thinking that going to meetings and just talking about how I would feel would make me better. And then I would leave and I would go home and I would feel like killing myself again. Okay? And it wasn't about focusing on the problem and focusing on my problems and going to AA meetings and dropping my little bag of problems in the meeting and hoping that somehow through some sort of group therapy, catharsis, osmosis, I would feel better sitting in a room of AA. And that was not the case for me. And it wasn't until I started focusing on the solution singularly, focusing on the program of action to get connected to the solution, to begin to overcome that problem, and then carrying that solution. This great news, that's what it says. This is the great news. Carrying that great news to someone else, man. That's when my life began to change forever. Okay? And I love this, man. It says we have a way out on which we can absolutely agree. Well, how do we absolutely agree on it? Because we have a book. This book is the perfection of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It is irrefutable. It is irrefutable. This book is our program. We absolutely agree on this book. And don't get me started on the Plain Language Big Book, okay? Just don't ask. Don't even ask how I feel about the Plain Language Big Book, okay? We absolutely agree on this book, okay? What is in this book? And we have a way out upon which we can join in brotherly and sisterly harmonious AA meetings. No, it doesn't say AA meetings. It says action. It says action, okay? Going to AA meetings, and this is part of what I needed to understand. I thought that going to AA meetings was recovery from alcoholism. That is not the case. And you can disagree with that. I think it's part of recovery, but ultimately going to AA meetings is where we go to testify to the fact that the actual program of recovery works. And my motive in going to meetings used to be, I'm going to go to meetings. Everybody here ever said, I really need an AA meeting? I need a meeting, right? And what do we mean when we're saying we need a meeting? I need someone to go and listen to my problems. Problems, okay? I'm going to take my problems and I'm just going to dump them on a meeting. What should be my motive in going to meetings? My motive in going to meetings ought to be carrying the message to another suffering alcoholic. And that's what I've learned, brothers and sisters, is when I'm focused on your suffering, I am no longer obsessed with my own suffering. You guys with me on that? When I go to a meeting, my motive in going there should be to take something there, not to steal something from that meeting. Okay? And when I began to focus on the solution instead of focusing on the problem, it changed everything. a way out upon which we can absolutely agree. They were going to name this book The Way Out. Prior to this book being named Alcoholics Anonymous, they were going to name it The Way Out. And I think that would have been a heck of a name for this book, because it is absolutely, we have a way out. No matter what problems you have tonight, how sad you feel, how desperate you feel, how alone you feel, how empty you may feel, we have a way out upon which we can absolutely agree. And it's in this book. The last thing I'm going to say, guys, it was quite mind-blowing to me to learn that not everything I heard in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous necessarily had anything to do with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay? I promise you, there was a lot of things that I would hear in AA meetings that had nothing to do with the program written in this book. Okay? And anything that I hear in a meeting, guys, what I need to do is check it out with the perfection of our message, which is in this book. Okay? Not everything I hear, especially for anyone who's new here, I want you to know, just because you hear it in an AA meeting does not necessarily mean it has anything to do with AA. You guys agree with that? You guys with me on that? This book is the perfection of our message. This is the message upon which we can absolutely agree. All right? Okay, back to you, Brad. Thank you.
Hey, if the book was called The Way Out, would that mean we'd go to Way Out meetings then?
Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself. I think it's funny. An illness of this sort, and we have come to believe it an illness, involves those about us in a way no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him, and no one is angry or hurt. But not so with the alcoholic illness, for with it there goes annihilation of all the things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all those whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase the list. We hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are or who may be affected. There are many. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. Strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find this even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor.
All right, guys, we got some italics coming up here. We got some squiggly writing. That means this is key, essential information. All right? So let's be mindful of it. We'll talk about it here in a minute.
But the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished.
Okay, so it says when we're properly armed with facts about ourselves. It does not say that we are properly armed with facts about Alcoholics Anonymous. It says when we are properly armed with facts about ourselves. What facts about ourselves would we share? Well, quite simply, we will share our cycle stories with a newcomer. This is where those stories, those 5 stories that we came up with from the cycle of alcoholism, come full circle, come full cycle. How about that? They come full cycle. Okay. So whereas initially we came up with those stories from the cycle, and here I'm going to share it with you guys in just a minute. Whereas initially, the reason that we come up with these cycle stories from the doctor's opinion was to qualify ourselves in step 1 as an alcoholic. Now we see these cycles are going to come full circle, full cycle. And when we talk to a newcomer, it's one thing to beat him over the head with his big book and talk about a spiritual solution. But Bill Wilson tried that for 6 months prior to ending up in the Mayflower Hotel and going to see Dr. Bob. Bill Wilson tried for 6 months to carry a spiritual holy roller message to drunks, and none of them liked it. None of them were receptive to it. And Bill went to Dr. Silkworth and said, Dr. Silkworth, what do I tell these drunks? What am I doing wrong? And he said, Bill, stop telling them about your hot white spiritual flash. Tell them about how hopeless you were. Tell them about how desperate you were. Tell them about the way that you think, and tell them about the way that you drank, just like I indicated to you in this cycle of alcoholism, okay? So part of the reason why I need to have these stories in my back pocket all the time, ready to share with someone, is so that I can genuinely gain the confidence of another alcoholic by sharing my own stories, not my life story. God knows nobody needs to hear that. Okay. What I'm sharing are just simple cycle stories, just like we went through in step one. A time where I swore off, became restless, irritable, and discontent when I was sober, had an insane thought, took the first drink, triggered the allergy, entered the spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. Over and over, okay? And so we share stories from our own lives, and that is how we gain the confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Once that has happened, and in fact, Bill gives us a very, very definitive description in the chapter Working with Others on exactly how to lay out the pitch for AA to another alcoholic, okay? But it starts with us gaining their confidence. The way we gain their confidence is not by telling them stories about AA or sharing facts about AA. It's sharing facts about ourselves. And once we've done that, we can gain their confidence. Until we've gained their confidence, little or nothing can be accomplished. I remember I was in a treatment center called South Country here in Alberta, and it was one of those. It was like AA summer camp, basically. It was better living through video games and volleyball, and we would do a little kumbaya around the feelings chart every day and all that stuff. And all of my therapists there were all psychologists. They were all book learned university people. And I just kind of resented all of them and thought I was better than them and smarter than them. And, they're just getting paid. That's all that they care about, so on and so forth. And then the next treatment center I went to was a place called 1835 House. And 1835 House, it got my attention because not only were all of the people there, were all of the counselors, ex-alcoholics, they were all residents of the treatment center. Okay. And that got my attention. So this next line, that the man who was making the approach has had the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he's talking about, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer, that he has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever except the sincere desire to be helpful, that there are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. These are the conditions we have found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. And it was when I was exposed to those counselors and then other men and other people in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I could hear, my God, they thought the way that I thought. They felt the way that I feel, but they don't feel that way anymore. And there were people, anybody here ever known someone in AA who just carried that message to you? You could just see them. Just like when Ebby's standing on Bill's doorway, there he stood, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. I love this line. His whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that this is a man with a real answer. Man, when someone is lit up in Alcoholics Anonymous, they don't have to say a word. They don't have to speak from a podium. You can see it all over them, man. You can see it across a room. That guy is lit up. Okay? Anyone here ever had someone like that in their life in AA? Somebody that you saw and they carried a message without even saying a word to you, and you just knew it, that their whole deportment shouts at the man that he shouts at the prospect that he is a man with a real answer. Now here's a question. Does your deportment at meetings shout at a prospect that you are a person with a real answer? Does yours? Does mine? This is a question I need to ask myself. And this is part of why, we have a tradition at my group and my sponsors group that we dress up a little bit when we go to AA, man. Okay? We put on a blazer. We tried, and it's not about looking good or some people make fun of our meeting and call it a show and shine and whatever. We don't care. We think it's about respect for Alcoholics Anonymous, okay? And this is what we're getting to here. Respect for AA, respect for who we are and what we do, respect for the home group, and that our deportment shouts at the man that he has a real answer. And I'll tell you what, guys, it doesn't really matter if we're wearing a blazer or pocket square. What matters is the light in the eye, the smile on the face, the handshake, and the warmth, okay? So ask yourself, I need to ask myself, when I'm meeting newcomers, how do I look? Do I look like a man that has an answer? Or do I look like some guy who's about ready to jump off a bridge? Okay. It's a good question. It's a good question that I need to ask myself. Okay. A warm handshake and a hug and a smile and a you're welcome here. We're glad you're here. You are welcome, wanted, and needed can go a long way. That newcomer might not hear a single other thing that night, but he will remember the smile and the warmth and the laughter and the energy. All right. Okay, Brad, back to you. Thanks, buddy. I know I read that paragraph. Right back to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to start at the next one. None of us
Very
makes
good.
a single location of this work, nor do we think its effectiveness would be increased if we did. We feel that elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. All of us spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort which we are going to describe. A few are fortunate enough to be so situated that they can give nearly all of their time to the work.
Okay, so that's another great litmus test for me to ask myself how I am doing in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because it says all of us spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort we are going to describe. Now, I know that the amount of spare time we have may vary. Okay? I do a lot in AA, but I don't have a wife and I don't have children. So I have a lot of spare time. I have a lot of spare time that not a lot of people have. I understand that a lot of people have families and obligations and little kids and all that kind of stuff. But the spare time that we have, am I spending much of that spare time in the type of effort that we're describing? Or am I a little bit too busy watching the hockey game to be bothered to go do any actual AA work? Am I a little bit too busy enjoying all of the gifts that I've gotten from AA without having any spiritual desire to give them back? Okay. All of us spend much of our spare time in the type of effort that we're going to describe. It's something that's another baseline. I ask myself that question. Am I spending much of my spare time in this type of work? It's a good question. Okay, back to you, Brad.
If we keep on the way we are going, there is little doubt that much good will result, but the surface of the problem would hardly be scratched. Those of us who live in large cities are overcome by the reflection that close by hundreds are dropping into oblivion every day. Many could recover if they had the opportunity we have enjoyed. How then shall we present that which has been so freely given us? We have concluded to publish an anonymous volume setting forth the problem as we see it. We shall bring to the task our combined experience and knowledge. This should suggest a useful program for anyone concerned with a drinking problem.
So originally it wasn't going to be just a book. There was 3 things that they were going to do. Number 1, they were going to build the first 100 were going to build a hospital. Now you got to imagine this is Bill Wilson, okay, who is like big business, like legal stockbroker, and always looking for another business angle. All right, and he was fueled by another guy named Hank Parkhurst, one of the first 100. Hank Parkhurst he had worked for the Standard Oil Company. He was a salesman, okay, and so they had these big plans, big designs. They were going to build a big AA hospital, okay, that would be, of course, run by none other than Dr. Bob, of course, right? And then they were going to have a professional class of 12-steppers, okay? They were going to have professional men of AA and women who would go out in pairs, and they would, for a price, they would go out and carry the message to other people, okay? I know it sounds crazy today, but these are the ideas that they had. And those both fell through. There's a long story about John D. Rockefeller not giving them any money to do any of this. And they had to, the only thing that they were able to do, the only thing they were able to afford to do was to write a book. That's it. That's the only thing that they were able to afford to do. And for anyone who knows the history of AA, they actually sold shares. They sold shares in a company called Works Publishing that for $25, you could buy shares of a big book. And he bought shares in that corporation. That corporation published the book, and they initially printed 5,000 copies of the book. And I'm here to tell you, nobody made money on that deal. Nobody. Okay. Nobody got rich on AA ever. No one. And that's what happened. So when they say we have concluded to publish an anonymous volume, that was not the only conclusion that they came to. But thank God we were divinely and spiritually driven that it was the only conclusion that God came to. and publishing a book was all that AA ever did. And thank God it's all that we ever needed. I think if we would have built a hospital and had professional 12-step, class of 12 steppers, I think it would have destroyed AA. And I'm sure you guys probably agree. So back to you, Brad.
Of necessity, there will have to be discussion of matters medical, psychiatric, social, and religious. We are aware that these matters are, from their very nature, controversial. Nothing would please us so much as to write a book which would contain no basis for contention or argument. We shall do our utmost to achieve that ideal. Most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints and a respect for their opinions are attitudes which make us more useful to others. Our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. You may already have asked yourself,
Brad, do you want to say anything about that last line? I feel like one of us should. I think it's pretty I think it's pretty self-evident that my life depends upon my constant thought of others and how I may help meet their needs. But would you like to say anything about it?
I would love to. And because I was just telling somebody this story again yesterday or the day before, because I don't think you ever remember. So when Kevin first became my sponsor 7 or 8 years ago, the first time we went for lunch, I asked him at the end of lunch what my homework was, what my assignment was. And at that time he said, your job is to, in every single interaction that you are in with every person in your life, in every situation, to look at that situation and try to figure out how you can be of service to that person or to that situation. And I went, oh, piece of cake. I got it. I didn't understand why at the time, right? But I think I understand quite a bit more why now. But if I'm trying to be of service to others and I'm trying to give, I'm no longer a taker. And Kevin talks lots in this about going through this transition of being a taker to a giver. I need to be of service to others in all situations in my life. And I can tell you that I fail at that miserably. I'm better at it now than I've probably ever been, but I sometimes go days without even thinking about it. I think I do it more. I'm just sometimes maybe more just out of practice maybe, but I still am not perfect at it. I'm a long ways from perfect at it. And so the short end, the end of the story is, as long as I'm thinking about others and trying to work for and do things for them, it's the only time I'm really not thinking about me. That's it.
Amen. Very good. All right, let's continue on.
You may already have asked yourself why it is that all of us become so very ill from drinking. Doubtless you are curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. If you are an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. We shall tell you what we have done. Before going into a detailed discussion, it may be well to summarize some points as we see them. How many times people have said to us, I can take it or leave it alone. Why can't he? Why don't you drink like a gentleman or quit? That fellow can't handle his liquor. Why don't you try beer and wine? Lay off the hard stuff. His willpower must be weak. He could stop if he wanted to. She's such a sweet girl. I should think he'd stop for her sake. The doctor told him that if he ever drank again, it would kill him, but there he is, all lit up again. Now these are commonplace observations on drinkers which we hear all the time. Back of them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. We see that these expressions refer to people whose reactions are very different from ours. Moderate drinkers.
Okay, guys. So right now, we are going to learn. Really, as I said, one of the pivotal things I needed to begin to understand in AA: the difference between moderate drinkers, heavy drinkers, and real alcoholics. Okay, and I think the big book and the first 100 do a masterful job of explaining the difference between them. We'll talk about this. I'm going to show you guys how I like to think about this and why it's meaningful to me, and then we'll continue on.
Moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone.
All right, so these are people like my parents, okay? Alan and Carol. They are moderate drinkers. By any definition of the word, they are moderate drinkers. They're disgustingly normal. They do absurd things that make no sense to people like us, okay? My father, when my father has a drink, he'll get a little tumbler, a little rocks glass, and then he'll get a shot glass. Okay, and he'll pour exactly enough whiskey up to a line on that little shot glass, and then he'll pour that in over ice because apparently temperature matters when he's drinking. Okay, like okay, and here's the thing: if he pours it into that shot glass and it goes above that line, do you know what he does? He'll pour just a little bit back in the bottle because you don't want to, you don't want to get, and then he'll pour that into the ice, and then he'll pour that with Ryan Coke. But if we go to a restaurant and I say, Dad, are you going to have a Ryan Coke? He'll say, you know what? No, I might have a drink at home later, but I don't really like the way restaurant whiskey tastes. And they use cheap whiskey, and I don't really like the way the Coke tastes. It's really abnormal. I'll have a drink maybe later, and I think, Dad, you can level with me. I'm adopted, right? I do not identify with that type of drinking whatsoever. I don't get it, man. Okay. First of all, why would you have a shot glass if you're not going to be drinking shooters? Okay. It doesn't make any sense. But I'll tell you one thing. Not a single time in either one of my parents' life ever have they ever questioned once if they had a drinking problem. Never. Not as a result of their own drinking. Never. They never lost control. They never got into trouble. They never did anything they regretted. And they never came to and said, that's it. And they've never sung the alcoholic national anthem. I'm never going to drink again. Never once. Never once. They've never even questioned it. They can take it or they can leave it alone. In fact, when I was brand newly sober, I had a lot of trouble being around my parents if they were drinking. So you know what they did? They just didn't drink. And they didn't care. And they actually put a padlock on the liquor cabinet whenever I came over, which was a really good idea. It was very helpful and a good idea. Okay. They can take it. They can leave it alone. It doesn't matter. All right. Brad.
Then we have a certain type of hard drinker.
Now, this is my Uncle Daryl. This is my Uncle Daryl. All right. My Uncle Daryl is a hard drinker. Okay. Back to you, Brad.
He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. If a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate, although he may find it difficult and troublesome and may even need medical attention.
My Uncle Daryl drank hard for a long time. He was a very outdoorsy guy, fisherman, lots of ice fishing, loved to drink when he was ice fishing. And there was a time where he was starting to get in a little bit of trouble with it. Okay. And my Aunt Bonnie said, Daryl, you drink again, I'm leaving. And Daryl said, Bonnie, I love you. I don't want you to leave. I'll never drink again. And he never did. To my knowledge, to this day, he's never gone to Alcoholics Anonymous. He's never had a problem with it. He started ice fishing a lot more. He started golfing a lot more. But that day, he stopped drinking cold. There was no rehab. There was no detox. There was no treatment. There was nothing. Now, he was a guy that looked on the outside like he was starting to get in trouble. He looked a little bit like an alcoholic. No problem. No question, rather. No question. But he just stopped. He just shut it down. Now, why is that? How is that possible? You know, my best friend, Luke, you guys have heard me talk about Luke. Luke was my running buddy, man. Luke was my toxic twin. All right. Luke was like, when I was doing a lot of the most debaucherous stuff I've done, Luke was right beside me. And then one day, Luke just fell in love and went to university and became a university teacher. Like, that's not fair. You can't just say, I quit and I give up, man. And I catapulted past him right into mental institutions and psych wards and treatment centers over and over and over for years and years and years in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous. He could stop just like that, and I couldn't. I couldn't at all. I could not put the brakes on. You know, me drinking alcohol, when I start drinking, it's like, for anyone in Canada, any of my Canadian friends will know, it's like driving on sheer ice towards a brick wall. And it does not matter how hard I try and slam on those brakes. It does not matter. Once I start drinking, that car is skidding into that wall every time. Those brakes, by the way, are what we call willpower. No matter how hard I try to exert my willpower, and slam on those brakes and try and stop, I'm going to slam into that wall every time. Why is it that my Uncle Daryl's willpower worked? Why is it that Luke's willpower, why is it they could slam on the brakes and stop and I couldn't? What's the difference? Well, and let me ask you this question. Anybody here ever, when you were drinking or using, had an ill health situation and continued to drink anyway? You got sick, or the warning of a doctor said you better stop or you're not, or you're going to be in trouble, and you kept drinking anyway. Falling in love. Anyone here ever fall in love and swear I'm never going to drink again and then drink again? Change of environment. Okay. How many times did I try to change my environment, change the external circumstances, and find myself drinking again? Okay. Heavy drinkers, if given sufficient reason, can stop or moderate. They may find it troublesome, but ultimately they will stop. What is different about the real alcoholic? Brad, let's read the next paragraph.
But what about the real alcoholic? He may start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. But at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink.
All right, let's keep going through the entire next paragraph, please, Brad.
Here is the fellow who has been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. He does absurd, incredible, tragic things while drinking. He is a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He is seldom mildly intoxicated. He was always more or less insanely drunk. His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature, but little. He may be one of the finest fellows in the world, yet let him drink for a day and he frequently becomes disgustingly and even dangerously antisocial. He has a positive genius for getting tight at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. He is often perfectly sensible and well balanced concerning everything except liquor, but in that respect he is incredibly dishonest and selfish. He often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, and has a promising career ahead of him. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, and then pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. He is the fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around. Yet early next morning, he searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. If he can afford it, he may have liquor concealed all over his house to be certain no one gets his entire supply away from him to throw down the waste pipe. As matters grow worse, he begins to use a combination of high-powered sedative and liquor to quiet his nerves so he can go to work. Then comes the day when he simply cannot make it and gets drunk all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine or some sedative with which to taper off. Then he begins to appear at hospitals and sanitariums.
So the only thing I want to say about that description of the real alcoholic, there's that line where it says he is more or less always insanely drunk. Okay. I want you guys to understand, as I understand, that means I am more or less always insanely drunk when I am drinking. Once I start drinking, I am almost always insanely drunk. Because here's the problem. When I came to AA, man, I was looking for any loophole that I could find to slip out of this program and to not be one of these things. All right. And so here's the problem. I would read that and I would think, well, I wasn't always insanely drunk, because I would stay sober for a period of time and then I would drink again, but I wasn't always insanely drunk. That's not what they mean. They mean when I am drinking, am I almost always insanely drunk once I start drinking? By that definition, that's a big 10-4. That's a big 10-4, okay? It doesn't mean that it's impossible to stay drunk all the time. That's the problem. The problem is that we keep sobering up. And I go through the well-known stages of a spree and I emerge remorseful. And I get sober again, and I'm so ashamed of what I did when I was drinking. And I hate myself so much for what I've done. And you take away that alcohol, and I don't feel better, man. I get worse. And here's what I want you guys to understand, and I'm going to explain this in a minute in detail. A heavy drinker, my Uncle Daryl or Luke, you take alcohol away from them, and they feel better. You take alcohol away from me, I don't get better. I get worse. Alcoholism is a disease that begins when I stop drinking. Drinking is not the beginning of alcoholism. Drinking is the end result of alcoholism. It is the end result of the restlessness, the irritability, the discontent, the spiritual dis-ease, the spiritual sickness. Terror, bewilderment, frustration, despair, resentment, fear, anxiety, emptiness, depression, suicidality. That's what my alcoholism looks like, man. And that's who I become when I'm not drinking. I stop drinking, that's how I become. Inevitably, of course, I'm going to drink again. You take alcohol away from a heavy drinker, they get better. You take alcohol away from a real alcoholic like me, I get worse. You bear with me here for another page, and I'm going to take you guys through an exercise that'll explain it in even better detail. Brad, we're going to keep going right up until centers in his mind rather than in his body, okay?
This is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic, as our behavior patterns vary, but this description should identify him roughly. Why does he behave like this? If hundreds of experiences have shown him that one drink means another debacle with all its attending suffering and humiliation, why is it he takes that one drink? Why can't he stay on the water wagon? What has become of the common sense and willpower that he still sometimes displays with respect to other matters? Perhaps there never will be a full answer to these questions. Opinions vary considerably as to why the alcoholic reacts differently from normal people. We are not sure why, once a certain point is reached, little can be done for him. We cannot answer the riddle. We know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years, he reacts much like other men. We're equally positive that once he takes any alcohol whatever into his system, something happens both in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body.
Let's finish that paragraph, Brad.
Okay, if you ask him why he started on that last bender, the chances are he will offer you any one of 100 alibis. Sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc an alcoholic's drinking bout creates. They sound like the philosophy of the man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so that he can't feel the ache. If you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of an alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk.
All right, guys. So here's some stuff that I want to share with you, and I'm going to do this very quickly because I want to finish right at 7 o'clock. Because one of my favorite things to do is to go around the circle and everyone introduce themselves and let us know where you're from. And I found if I start to go like I'm going 20 minutes over, some of y'all have to leave, and I want to make sure everyone has a chance to say hello. When we talk about that example, see, we just lost someone. Don't worry, I'm not paying attention though. I don't obsess over that. Don't worry. All right, that example, a guy who hits himself in the head with a hammer to get rid of a headache. I remember reading that and I was like, yeah, that's me. I get that. I totally identify with that. And I read that for years thinking that the problem is that I hit myself in the head with a hammer. That's the problem in that analogy, right? Wrong. You know what the problem is in that analogy? It's not the hammer, it's the headache. That's the problem. It's the headache. An Alcoholics Anonymous is a 12-step program, a pain reliever to remove the headache. And the headache in this scenario is what we call the spiritual sickness, okay? So I'm going to share this with you guys very quickly. We can go over it again next week. This is something that I came up with to try and explain this to people in this big book study. Okay, so there are people who have control when they drink. They never lose control. They have control, and they are spiritually fit people. Okay, if I have control when I drink, and I am a spiritually fit person, then I am a normal drinker, or what is known as a moderate drinker. Okay, in our book. Does that make sense, you guys? They have control over the amount that they drink, and they are spiritually well people, and they are normal drinkers or moderate drinkers. Okay, you with me on that? Thumbs up if you're with me on that. Thumbs up. Okay, now we have people who are not able to control. They're non-control people. They don't have control over the amount that they drink when they drink, but they are spiritually well. They are spiritually fit. They do not have the headache, if you will. There is therefore no need for them to beat themselves over the head. And when they stop beating themselves over the head with a hammer or a vodka, they start to feel better. Why do they feel better? They feel better because they are spiritually fit. They were born that way. I don't know why. Some people are born that way, but I wasn't one of them. Okay, my grand sponsor Clancy says it's almost like when we're in heaven and we're going through and they're putting insulation on the wiring of people, and somebody like, hey God, and we just slip right through, and nobody gets to put any insulation on our wiring. Okay, and we're just out there, just like exposed nerve endings, crazy, sensitive, nuts, insane people. Okay, now. There are people in the world who are nuts, crazy, insane people who never, ever have a drinking problem. Never. They have control over the amount that they're taking, but they are still not spiritually fit. We call those people neurotic. You ever heard that saying before? They're neurotic people. Now listen to this. You want to hear a definition of the word neurotic? I bet it'll sound familiar. Anxiety and apprehension, excessive worry and guilt, a tendency toward more negative emotions and reactions, irritability and anger, low self-esteem and self-consciousness, poor response to stress, an interpretation of everyday situations as threatening, depression and emotional instability. Okay? You might be thinking, my God, Kevin's reading my 5th step. No, that is a definition, a psychiatric definition of neuroses. Okay? But what happens is when these neurotic people drink, nothing happens. What happens to you and I when I drink, man, it's like fireworks going off. These guys can barely even strike a match when they drink. Me, it's like an atomic bomb going off. Do you guys understand? What happens to me when I drink does not happen to these people. There is one category of people, about 1 out of every 10 human beings, who has no control over the amount that they drink, and they are not spiritually fit. You take the booze away, and this spiritual craziness gets worse. And those are people that we call alcoholic. Does that make sense, you guys? That's the difference. That's the breakdown between normal people, moderate drinkers, heavy drinkers, real alcoholics. And then I think it's well to talk about these people who are neurotic in the world today, because we see a lot of them. And the nice upshot is that we also see, I think, a lot of people in the world reaching out for spirituality these days. Don't we see that? We see on covers of magazines, lots of mindfulness stuff, lots of spiritual new age stuff at chapters, because I think a lot of people are realizing that there is a deeper need for spirituality in the world. And how lucky are we? How lucky are we to be in AA and to have one of the best programs in the world to be able to connect to this power, and to have the emphasis behind it that we have to do this because our life depends on it. All right. And that's what it is, man. That's what it's all about. We're working this program like our life depends on it, because it does. I work this program. I take these steps upon which we can absolutely agree and join in brotherly and harmonious action to achieve this solution, to overcome my problem, to get connected to that Wi-Fi that I was talking about earlier. That's the whole point. Okay. I take these steps. I make the necessary adjustments to get connected to that Wi-Fi. Okay. And where I used to have a very, very thin little connection to AA when we first get here, in step 3, it says, in effect, sometimes a very great one was felt at once, but today, baby, today I got broadband 5G. All right. I got that fiber optic going on today, brother. All right. And it's beautiful. So guys, we're going to stop there for tonight. It's 7:01. Recording stopped.